Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for such a timely conversation following yesterday's elections in Chile. I'm Jason Marzek, Vice President and Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arsht Latin America Center. As we now know, the results will lead to a runoff between Jeanette Jara, who obtained 26.9% of the vote, and Jose Antonio Cast, who received 23.9%. This runoff contest was expected. One of the big surprises of the day yesterday was that Franco Parisi, with 19.7% of the vote, secured third place, beating out other candidates, including Johannes Kaiser and Evelyn Mate. These numbers show clearly what's at stake in a second round, and also will help us to understand the dynamics that will take place over the next few weeks as we head to that second round on Sunday, December 14th. So this morning's conversation will explore what these results might mean for the country, and also what the next president, who the next president may next be. We have about 45 minutes to unpack these results. These elections will, of course, shape Chile's economy, its security environment, and its investment climate, which are all fundamentally important, not just for Chile, but for the larger region, for the United States, and I would even say for the global community. And as one of Latin America's most stable democracies, the choices made yesterday will have implications for years to come. Of course, a four-year presidency, as we look ahead to the December 14th runoff and what might transpire as part of that vote. We're going to focus today on three main questions. First, what do the results tell us about voter priorities and the political mood in Chile? What should we expect in the lead up to the runoff? And third, how does this outcome shape Chile's relations with the United States at a time when regional stability and growth are particularly important? This discussion is also part of our broader Chile Election Series 2025 programming, and I invite all of our viewers to continue to stay attuned for more in that regard. Before we start, I'm pleased to introduce our four guests. First, Ambassador Dario Paya, former permanent representative of Chile to the Organization of American States, and a longtime figure in Chilean politics and diplomacy. As well, Paul Esteves, the CEO of AmCham Chile, and a longtime partner of our center, who leads efforts to strengthen economic ties and investment between Chile and the United States. Third, Professor Sergio Ursua of the University of Maryland, an expert on labor markets, education, and economic policy in Latin America. And finally, Juan Pablo Lavin, founder of Panel Ciudadano, a leading platform that tracks public opinion and citizen engagement across Chile, and who has been closely following this election cycle. So with that, let's get started, head right to the discussion. I'm going to start off with you, Juan Pablo. You've been tracking voter sentiment across the country from the very beginning of this campaign. Based on what we saw in last night's vote, what are your first takeaways? And talk to us about some of the surprises that you saw. First, maybe surprises in turnout, or in how different regions or demographic groups voted yesterday.
Well, Jason, thanks for having me here. Thanks for the invitation. I think that the most important takeaway for foreign people is the size of the electorate. In this election, voted more than 13 million, and the average since the return to democracy was 7 million of voters. So it's almost twice, almost the double of people voted. And it's very likely that the surprising results in terms of the ratings obtained by Parisi and also the low ratings obtained by Jara are explained by this mandatory voter that voted for the first time in a presidential election and in a parliamentary election. Actually, if you check, for example, region by region or commune by commune, you will see that in the zones, in the regions where the turnout rate double, like from 40 to 80, from 40 to 85, you can see that there is a strong correlation in those regions with a low rating of Jara and an increasing or huge rating of Parisi. So it's really likely that the mandatory voters are the ones who are explaining the surprising results. surprising between quotes, because, for example, in our survey, if you check our mean absolute error, we were the first one here in Chile, the best ones, and the margin, the error was just 2%. So the surprise was Parisi in the third place, but also you need to know, it's important to notice that this was the first election with mandatory vote, and this mandatory voter who is skeptical with the traditional way of doing politics, they tend to vote for this Parisi character, who is a candidate who concentrate all his communication in that he's not from the left, not from the right. He is coming from the other side, I mean, and that's the most important thing. I think the most important thing, that he doesn't follow any ideology or any like long-term vision of the country, and these mandatory voters are really like short-term people. They don't follow big ideologies, and they vote for emotions, and he was the most important candidate who can capture this kind of emotions against the establishment.
And Juan Pablo, pick up. There were also votes yesterday for, of course, senators and diputados. How did that those mandatory voters figure into those contests?
Well, probably the thing that we can say there is that the incumbent deputies and senators, they didn't have a good election here, and it's for the same reason that I'm saying. This mandatory voter are voting against the people who is in power. Whoever is in power, it doesn't matter if he or she is from right or left. The important thing behind this, or supporting their vote, is that they are incumbent, and these people is voting against, and that will be really important for the second round for sure.
And we'll go back to the second round in a moment. Sergio, let me turn to you. The economy has been one of the biggest issues on voters' minds. Inflation, jobs, inequality, all shaped how people have viewed this race. When you look at the first round results, what does that tell? What does it tell us about what Chileans are prioritizing right now?
Well, first of all, Jason, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you to the Atlantic Council for having me here today. So, look, I think the message is clear. Voters, yesterday, the message from them is super clear. Unemployment has been above 8% for about almost 3 years, 9% among women. Investment has been stagnant for a long time. Expectation never really turned around. So, I think that at the end of the day, this election was less about ideology and more about results. I think the priorities right now are on economic growth. I have no question about that. Bringing investments back to the country, creating jobs is going to be fundamental. And I don't think, based on the results, that Chileans really have a good evaluation of the Boric administration. I think in fact, they are probably deeply disappointed with what happened in the country. And so I think Chileans are, going back to your question, I think Chileans are going to be prioritizing growth, job creation, investments. And they didn't simply see progress on those fronts. And this was a huge penalty for the candidate Jara, the former Ministry of Labor. So for the candidate then in this context, right, who's now leading, the big challenges will be to present credible, a realistic plan, especially given the things on the table, this promise of tax cuts, and in a context of a very tight fiscal environment. So the way I see it, the message from the government, from the voters, was very clear. The economic performance of the Boric administration has been deeply disappointing.
And Sergio, just a follow-up as we look to the next about the next month and as we prepare for the runoff, do you see the economic debate shifting in the next few weeks?
So I think it's going to be, we will see sharper contrasts between the two candidates. And in fact, yesterday night, already Janet had hinted that yesterday in her speech, they're going to be highlighting differences, not similarities between the two programs. But what is going to be really dominating the debate during the next 2 weeks is going to be the budget bill. That it has to be, it's a very unusual situation because the budget bill was rejected a few weeks ago, and the debate is starting this Monday, the day after the election. And this is the most important bill in the country. We will see what happens. It's unclear to me whether the Ministry of Finance will double down on the optimistic view about their projections. But they insist we're going to be in a very strange situation where the political dispute could actually escalate quickly and take over the economic discussion. So it's going to be really interesting. There will be 2 weeks that are going to be fascinating when it comes to the connection between economic debate and politics.
Thanks, sir. Ambassador Pai, I want to go to you, and then I'll move to Paula next. But Ambassador Pai, you've seen Chile's democracy evolve through different moments over the years. I'd like for you to pick up on Juan Pablo's comments or Sergio's, and also your additional thoughts on how you see what we witnessed yesterday, both in the first round of the presidential vote, but also with regard to the congressional elections too.
Good. All right. I think there are several dimensions in which what we just saw is extraordinary. First, presidential elections everywhere are usually about defining competing views on what the problem is and who the best solution to the problem is. Here you had a situation where all candidates agreed on what the agenda should be. It was about the economy, crime, and the border. Even the communist candidate agreed on what the problems were. A second thing that was extraordinary was the rejection of the government. 72% of people voted for an explicitly opposition platform. The nuance is that Parisi and his party, in fact, the line he always used was ni fachos ni comunachos, non-fascists, the right, non-comunachos, the communists on the left. He took a stance, the non-ideological stance that Juan Pablo described earlier, but to basically proclaim the same list of concerns and priorities. So that was, historically, I haven't looked past 100 years, but I'm pretty certain that you have to go back to the 30s to have progressive political forces do as bad as they did yesterday. And the third thing that I think is extraordinary, it's that if you look at what comes next, it's a moment of, in Chile we would say sinceramiento, where certain things need to be admitted, and you need to I'm running out of English here, to confess to certain mistakes in the past. If you look at the plight of the political center, which vanished, disappeared, it's not there. In fact, many political parties representing the center will, as a result of the election results, will be legally eliminated. And then the center right had a weak showing, and the center left again almost disappeared. To a large degree, that is the result of two things that, to a large degree, we lived a lie. Let me elaborate. I'll try to do this in a minute. the social democracy in Chile, if you want to describe it in with the worldwide tag, governed very successfully in Chile, basically applying the economic framework that the military left after Pinochet in place. And they successfully applied it. In some ways, they even deepened it, but they never stopped criticizing it. They never stopped saying that it wasn't what they wanted, that it wasn't fair, that it wasn't just. They never did the Blair thing of thinking the unthinkable, of actually admitting there were certain ideas that they had in the past about the economy that were wrong and that they were incorporating new thoughts. They never did that until forces that truly wanted to get rid of free market economics and the general framework we had in place came to power with Bachelet in the second government, to some degree, the incorporation of the Frente Amplio and the Communist Party to government. And also on the center right, it never really articulated a vision to convince the country of a depth of the values of individual freedoms and individual initiative and entrepreneurship and the importance of merit, et cetera, maybe because most of the reforms inspired on those values were the imposition of a military government and were not democratically conquered institutions. So if for the center to come back in either expression, center right or center left, they're going to have to articulate a vision, something at which they failed in the past. Both things would be good for the country.
Yeah. Excellent points. I want to, I think, agreement on the agenda, rejection of the government, and a disappearing. I mean, these are three major trends that we saw play out yesterday. I want to move on to Paul, and then I'm going to pick up again a few of the points that you made, Dario and others. But Paul, I want to bring you with the business perspective. Markets, investors, and companies we're of course watching this election very closely. What's the initial reaction that you're seeing this morning?
Thank you, Jason. I'm happy to be here with very good friends. And as I mentioned to you before, at AmCham, we promote trade and investment between Chile and the US. So we are an apolitical organization, and we do not carry out political electoral analysis. And turning towards the yesterday election, I believe that an important signal for investors was the election itself, in the way that the process was orderly, peaceful, transparent, and that the results were clear before midnight. And this clearly demonstrates Chile's strong democracy and solid institutions. That's very important for investors, and because they value these attributes. And as Dario mentioned, we value that both candidates, they came from completely different ideologies and backgrounds, but both programs of government prioritize growth and security. But investors will be watching to see how the next presidential administration will address challenges such as productivity, public safety, and expediting the permitting process for investment projects, among other issues. And finally, mention, Jason, that for investments, they look for long term, and it is under decisions, because since it's long term, they're made on structural rather than circumstantial factors. So important things for investors include the international treaties in force, rule of law, and really clear tax incentives and governability.
Thank you, Paul. Just a follow-up question for you. What kind of, as we look ahead to the next month, what are those maybe some of the signals or additional policy clarity that would help that investors are going to be looking at as both Jeanette Hara and Jose Antonio Cast continue to make their appeal to voters ahead of the second round?
Yes, thank you. Very good question. So the pillars that I mentioned, that open to trade, fiscal responsibility, and the independence of central bank, I believe that there are pillars that it's possible to maintain stability in Chile, even in transition of power between political parties, and the business community seeks clear rules of the game and a fiscal discipline and an agenda that will reactivate growth. And it is essential for them to advance in this agenda and to see signals around these issues. So what will be happening with the streamlining of permitting process? We have very US important companies that are investing in mining, energy, data centers, that they have projects really to go, really to be developed. And also, as I mentioned earlier, a positive element of these electoral processes that both candidates agree of the importance of growth. And the question, of course, is how they're going to do it. Also, we will be looking at that. What are the specific proposals? So one thing that for you is important growth, but how are you going to make it possible?
Yeah.
And this convergence represent an opportunity to strengthen Chile's competitiveness. And just to, and my final here remark will be that institutionality, more than political cycles, is what makes a country safe and reliable destination for long-term investment.
And I think, Paul, as you said as well, one of the takeaways yesterday is the reinforcement of the strong democracy that Chile is, the strong institutions that Chile has. I think also when maybe U.S. companies are looking at where to invest, the reduced risk in Chile, given the strong institutions and the strong democracy compared to perhaps other places in the world, and of course that's a priority from the U.S. side, is how to accelerate more investment into Chile. I want to go back to you, Juan Pablo, as we look ahead to the second round. It may be helpful for our viewers who maybe follow a little bit less the ins and outs of Chilean politics to explain a little bit more of who is Franco Parisi. How did he get, I guess, within almost 500,000 votes of cast for the second round, and what do we expect to see play out within the coalitions, whether it's the Parisi voters, whether it's the Kaiser voters, the Mate voters, as we head to this December 14th second round?
Well, Jason, as we look ahead to the second round, what we are viewing, what we observe is not greater enthusiasm, it's rather an reinforcement of a specific voting disposition. Many of the new participants, these mandatory voters incorporated now in the election, they exhibit a kind of, we can call maybe negative preference structure. In other words, I mean, they are motivated by voting against existing political options than by supporting a candidate. Actually, I can tell you confidential information. I can share a preliminary insight with you that we conducted a survey last night, and our numbers are reflecting that the Parisi voter is transferring his vote to in a 40% to José Antonio Cast, 20% to Janet Jara, and the other 40% they are undecided. So the Parisi's vote behaves the way it does. It's super less about affinity and more about like a vehicle of beating the system. That is the most important thing of them. It's not like, probably they are not going to support José Antonio Cast, but they are going to vote against Janet Jara.
So Juan Pablo, is that about my quick math? Is that about 1 million votes that are kind of up in the air from Parisi?
Sorry?
That's about 1 million votes from Parisi
Yeah.
that are that 40% that are up in the air.
Yeah. Well, actually, in 2021, according to our numbers, a lot of people voted nulo. They didn't have this null. They vote null. And if that happens, for example, if the 40% of the vote of Franco Parisi is going to cast 20% to Jara, and the other 40% is null, the result, the expecting result will be the same, like 60% for cast and 40% for Jara. It's really similar to the votes the results that we have in 2022 for the referendum, the plebiscite, with the reject obtain 62% of the votes. Probably the correlation will be maintained in this second round. It's really hard for Jara to have a good result. Even having the 100% of the votes of Parisi, she will obtain something like 48%, 47%. So the likely outcome is that Cast will be the next president, and with a huge margin, not just in percentage, also in votes. His victory is very likely that it's going to be historic numbers here in Chile. The first president with more than 7 million of votes.
Because in addition to the Parisi voters, we also see the Kaiser and the Mate voters, which are a little bit more, a little easier to determine where those voters might end up, and share that with our viewers.
An important thing, Jason, there is that maybe a lot of them are not supporting Cast. The vote is against Jara. So that is really important, because maybe the Republican Party needs to know how to manage those numbers. All of we are going to see in December, it will be historic. I mean, the best numbers in voting in the history of Chile. So it's important for them to know that the majority of the people is not supporting José Antonio Cast. Rather than that, they are voting against Janet Jara, the candidate from the Communist Party.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. Ambassador Paya, I want to go to you, then back to Sergio and Paula. And also for our viewers, we have about 15 minutes left. If you have a question for the speakers, please go ahead and do so. Submit that using askac.org. That's askac.org. Ambassador Paya, you've represented Chile internationally. How do you think allies and regional partners are reading this moment? Especially, feel free to pick up on some of the comments that Juan Pablo made on expectations going into a second round, and how that might be viewed internationally.
Right. Let me start with that. The only comment I have regarding the Parisi vote and where it will go is, one way is looking at them and their intuitions, and it's easy to see almost a 50-50 split. But if you see things in movement developmentally, it's very hard to believe that people that's already supporting the political option, that had an agenda based on the economy, crime, and the border, going now back to support a candidate that represents the continuation of a government that has failed on all three counts. In a way, having voted for Parisi might have the effect of a transition that inevitably lands lots of them with Cast, rather than based on their traditional intuitions, maybe being more akin to a left-wing option. Anyhow, I think that if, as Juan Pablo anticipates, it's possible there'll be considerable support for the new government with Cast at the helm. It will be impossible not to to put it in a frame, in a regional frame of reference, with some people trying to figure out what does this have in common with what Milei is being the protagonist of in Argentina, and maybe even up north with the United States and the Trump administration. From the Chilean perspective, I think for all of us and for the business community, I think it will be critical to figure out what this means in terms of opportunities to readdress the current commercial environment, tariff environment between Chile and the US, whether with an incoming administration that is closer in political instincts, if you will. There's room for changes in that regard that would be very beneficial, important for Chile. As you all know, Chile decided almost unilaterally 30, 40 years ago to open itself to the world and have free trade with everyone. So we're not just affected deeply by whatever tariffs are important Chilean products. Anything that affects in any way international trade has an impact in Chile. Now we have elections next year. From top of my mind, Colombia and Peru are next in line. It will be interesting to see what conclusions or thoughts arise in those political environments, trying to interpret what has happened before in Argentina and Chile and what that might mean for them. It is certainly the case that in the current communications environment in the world, I'm quoting Bruce Springsteen here, and that I saw a few years ago, the center, it's a hard place to be in. You know, it's hard to be in the middle. It tends to disappear of lately. And that might be a trend that also plays out in the Colombian and Peruvian elections.
Dario, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question actually before coming to Sergio and Paul that I'm getting through Ask AC. And it's an important question. You started to allude to this, Dario, but Juan Pablo, you mentioned the high likelihood of the votes shifting to cast going ahead to the second round. And that assumption, and the assumption of a shift to the right in Chile's election, what are the implications more broadly for US-Chile policy alignment and opportunities to deepen? What are some of the opportunities to deepen the bilateral agenda, whether it's economics, of course, security, important for the Chilean voters, and important for the Trump administration, strategic economic zones. How can this shift help to ensure the U.S. remains and is an even stronger partner for Chile? And I'm riffing off of a question that was submitted by Carl Meacham here.
Good to hear about Carl. Well, I think security moves up to the top of the list quickly. Because to a large degree, the one aspect of the crime problem in Chile has to do with this international criminal organizations, and in the entire way in which the U.S. American administration is leading with Venezuela is with these considerations about crime and narcotics at the top of the agenda of the motivational set of reasons, not just the political situation, the non-democratic situation currently in Venezuela. So I think addressing international criminal organizations and the security concerns associated with it will be very, very relevant. There's a lot of room there for cooperation. And it's not an anecdote or an accident. It shouldn't be going forward that the current, just recently arrived U.S. ambassador to Chile, Brandon Judge, is someone whose background is border security and security concerns. So that in itself should open up the possibility of a lot of cooperation along criminal organization concerns.
And I know Ambassador Judd is also very much focused on how to accelerate more U.S. investment into Chile as well.
Sure.
Sergio, on that, let me turn back to you. Beyond the initial market reaction, if you could elaborate a little bit more on some of the structural long-term economic priorities that are going to demand attention. Dario was also mentioning or reinforce the openness of the Chilean economy, probably the most open economy, actually the most open economy in the region, given the number of trade agreements. So what will you be watching for, no matter who wins in December, insofar as top issues that are going to be front and center for the economic agenda? And of course, that is also related to the security agenda as well.
Right. So, Jason, I think there will be three priorities, to be honest. First one is economic growth. Second one is economic growth. And third one is economic growth. Really, the priority for the country at the end of the day is this long-term, to come back to a long-term trend of economic growth. Everything else depends on that in the context of Chilean economy. Chile, and again, has been stagnant for more than a decade. And that situation has limited the nation's ability to confront social challenges, including organized crime, which is a major challenge. Chile has become an example of the middle-income trap. That trap is real. And this election, at least to me, is an opportunity to break it down. And missing the opportunity would be very costly for the country. So how do you put this agenda together? I think going back to the foundations of what the success that Chile was back in the 90s and the 2000s is attracting investments, especially foreign investments. And we need to capitalize on the strategy in our strategic advantages in mining, in industry. And Chile is well positioned for the global energy transition, but the country needs to be smart and ambitious in terms of coming up with policies that turn the potential into jobs and higher income. Bottom line, Chile did not, I think my takeaway from this election, Chile did not become the grave of neoliberalism that President Boric once anticipated. Rather, actually, for at least the next 4 years, it will be the exile of a radical left-wing agenda. So when it comes to the region, I think that's an important message to keep in mind. And the voters, the message from the voters in this specific dimension, it was very clear. Jara was penalized, and they received a huge hit when it comes to voters, both at the presidential level, but also the parliament.
Thanks, Sergio. Paula, feel free to pick up on Sergio's points, but also a question that came in is the following: that Chile has been struggling to attract FDI like it used to in previous decades. What is the outlook with regard to the two candidates now, and really what needs to happen to assuage investor concerns and to be able to attract the key investor interest in Chile that is going to be so fundamental in the next presidency?
Thank you, Jason. So the U.S. is the second foreign investment in Chile. Especially, first, 60% of that investment is energy with 35%, then is data centers with 20%, and then mining with something like between 15% and 18%. So they're both three strategic sectors for the U.S. and Chile, and the U.S. and Chile, they have strategic relationship. We have also, it's our second trading partner, and if you take out copper, is the first trading partner. So of course, we work closely with the next president of Chile to enhance this important collaboration.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paula. So we just have a few more minutes. Juan Pablo, I want to ask, as we're looking ahead to mid-March in the presidential inauguration, there'll be a new president with a new Congress as well. What should our viewers know insofar as you've said previously that the high likelihood that more of the first round votes go to cast for the second round, assuming that, or even maybe the the potential of Jara pulling out a win. What do the congressional results mean and the coalitions in Congress insofar as how the next president will be able to govern? What does that make up, and what are those dimensions? How will that kind of play into, let's start with a cast presidency, their ability to kind of work with Congress? Explain a little bit of that for our viewers.
Well, that is a hard question because this new electorate needs delivery. Needs, for example, in the next, obviously I'm exaggerating, but they need that in the next 24 hours or in the next 2 weeks, since Cast will be the next president. They need, for example, a swift reduction in crime, expulsion of irregular immigrants, and this type of efficiency in the mandate. And that is really hard to do with a really fragmented Congress that we have now. The Republican Party will have to negotiate a lot, and it's important in this month that we have now ahead, until the next election, how are going to be those conversations between, for example, Johannes Kaiser and José Antonio Cast, Evelyn Matei and José Antonio Cast? Because, for example, for Johannes Kaiser, that he obtained a rating below than the one he was expecting, and we are not sure what he's going to do now. Probably, of course, he's going to support José Antonio Cast, but after that, if José Antonio Cast is not delivering in an efficient or quick manner, the manner that the people is expecting, he maybe will try to be a kind of opposition to José Antonio Cast, trying to be the one who use the ultra right side in the political spectrum. Something similar than the thing that did Cast with Piñera. So it's really important for the electorate that José Antonio Cast can deliver quickly, and not just in economy. Economy is a little bit lower, not lower, more not quick. Slower.
Slower, yes.
Yeah, slower, and he has to be really quick in things that in topics like crime and the expulsion of immigrants. So I think, yeah, if he's not delivering really quick, he will have problems from the right side of the political spectrum.
Well, thank you so much. I realize we could be speaking for probably another hour, looking at the results, the implications, and what it means moving forward, but we're unfortunately out of time. I want to end by thanking our four speakers, Ambassador Dario Paya, Paula Esteves, Sergio Sura, Juan Pablo Lavin, for your excellent comments, analysis. We were joined as well today, listening in by Adrian Arce, the founder of the Adrian Arce Latin America Center, Executive Vice Chair of the Atlantic Council, among the many other viewers. And I want to thank my colleague, Maite Gonzalez Latour, for putting this program together. We will continue to follow from the Atlantic Council the developments as we head to the second round, as we head from the second round to the inauguration, and as we move forward after the inauguration in Chile. I fundamentally think that there has been oftentimes a lack of attention to the importance of developments in Chile from a broader space, and we try to provide that additional insight analysis to recognize the importance of Chile both for Chile as well as for the region and for the United States as well. So with that, thank you all so much for joining us today and look forward to the next time.
Thanks.